Good evening. Tonight we're setting the record straight on what it means to lead, to govern, and to meet the expectations of Delawareans who are tired of waiting for progress. In a state where the Democratic Party dominates, you'd think we'd see bold leadership, transformative ideas, and results that speak for themselves. Delawareans deserve better than vague promises and lukewarm reforms. Our education system, it's ranked number 45th nationally. A sobering reminder that our children are paying the price for political complacency. Economic growth feels like an abstract goal, not a tangible plan. I haven't heard one. And voter turnout often reflects more than enthusiasm or trust. It reveals the barriers, frustrations, and the systematic issues that keep people from engaging with the process. Tonight, we're joined by two voices who've seen it all: the campaigns, the policies, the promises made, and the broken promises. And together, we'll explore the state of the Democratic Party in Delaware, the expectations we must hold for those who obtained office, and whether this election season will deliver meaningful change. This isn't about who wears the red tie or the blue tie. It's about whether leaders have the courage to deliver on their commitments and the competence to execute real solutions. That's right, the competence. It's about facing the issues head on, not hiding behind rhetoric or empty gestures. And it's about reminding those in power, those we trust, that trust is earned, not given. This is the agenda, and the stakes couldn't be higher. And the answers couldn't be more urgent. So let's get to work. Hello and welcome back to The Agenda. We were fortunate enough to have a nice holiday break and a New Year's break, and I hope that everyone had a safe one as well at home. But the issues haven't stopped, and we haven't stopped bringing the issues to you and making sure that your issues stay right here on the agenda. Tonight, we have some heavy hitters. We have true heavy hitters. Former Lieutenant Governor Matt Denn right here. Welcome, Mr. Denn.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
And former Den Rec leader, the man, and gubernatorial candidate, Collin O'Meara. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Mr. Den, first time agenda person, welcome.
Thank you.
We shop at the same store, Wawa.
Correct.
Love seeing you.
I was the first ever customer at the Concord Pike Wawa.
Okay.
Dropped my kid off at school. I didn't plan to be it, but dropped my kid off there and drove down the road and, confetti and the whole deal.
So beyond Lieutenant Governor,
It's probably my major claim to fame.
Major claim to fame. I got it. But I love what you're doing, and you've turned, you have all the accolades. You've ran for public office. You've won public office. You're, I guess, a voice here in the state of Delaware, and you haven't stopped for advocacy and advocacy for children and so many things that you're doing. I think it's great. And there's policy behind that. Please tell us a little bit about your agency.
Sure. I helped a bunch of other great folks found a nonprofit called Action for Delaware's Children after I decided not to run for re-election as Attorney General. And the main reason I decided not to run for re-election as Attorney General is that it had really taken me away from working on children's issues, which is a lot of what had gotten me into government in the first place, and I wasn't really able to focus on them, being the state's prosecutor. So we formed this nonprofit in 2020. Some other former elected officials, civic leaders, clergy, and we've really been dedicated to trying to put things on the agenda, number one, to advocate for kids in Dover, and then to the point that you were making in your introduction, trying to generate some grassroots interest in those issues so that legislators actually hear from their constituents about them. So we've been working in education, early childhood, lead poisoning.
That shocked me so much, sir. Lead poisoning, this is 2025 now.
Yep.
And we're still dealing with paint chips and kids putting them in mouths. And I can't, and How is it still being sold? Is it still being sold? Is it still on the walls? Like, what? I'm curious.
It's been illegal to be sold since 1978, so it's been that long that everyone has known that it's toxic. It's a horrible neurotoxin. There's irrefutable science that kids who have elevated lead have developmental delays. They have lower test scores. It extends all the way into adolescence, and they have more involvement in the juvenile justice system. It's awful. And so it hasn't been used since 1978, but every house that was built before 1978, there's a decent chance that it was used in painting those houses. So there are tens of thousands of residential units still in Delaware that likely have exposed lead paint, and we've got about 600 to 700 kids newly diagnosed every year with elevated lead levels. So it's a serious problem that the state could address and hasn't yet effectively addressed.
You did mention there was some legislation passed in regards to it.
Yeah, one of our major projects, and by the way, there's an organization called Lead Free Delaware that was way ahead of us working on this. So a lot of what we've been trying to do is help them get their agenda passed. But 2 years ago, Sarah McBride and Mimi Brown sponsored legislation that for kids who were diagnosed with lead poisoning set a bunch of things in motion to have testers go out to the house, see if there was exposed lead paint. If there was, bring people in to remediate it, all the things that you would want to have happen. So that's actually now law. And Governor Carney, to his credit, actually put some money behind it. There's been a total of about $5 million dedicated to that. The bad news on that front is that the implementation of that bill has been incredibly slow. So there have been precious few houses that have actually had the lead remediated. But even with all that does is address kids who already have elevated lead. And what really needs to happen is that we need to get into those houses before kids get lead poisoning. And that's a big part of our agenda for this coming year. And what we're trying to get people to contact their legislators about is let's do what a lot of surrounding states and municipalities have done and require that property owners check their property for exposed lead. And if there's exposed lead, get it fixed.
I'm still flabbergasted. We still have lead paint issues.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised that we're not moving fast enough. Unfortunately, doing this long enough to know the good things sometimes take time.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to get state agencies to take on new responsibilities because this is something that the state has never been asked to do before, and this is something incredibly important but also new. And it's not been a great success story. I mean, I'm an optimist, so it's a new year, and my hope is that we're going to be able to kick it into gear because every year that we don't, there's hundreds more kids who are unnecessarily getting exposed to this stuff.
Speaking of optimism, Colin O'Mara, thank you so much for coming today. The last time we were here running for governor, things didn't work out exactly the way that you wanted to, but I still believe that you are a true voice that people need to hear in regards to issues, not just issues in regards to the Democratic side, but what affects the people. So thank you so much for coming on tonight. My big discussion tonight is the Democratic Party, both from a state side and a federal side, and we can take that however way you would like to. But both of you, I know, are advocates for education. I'm a definite advocate. This show is, we bring this up constantly because we don't want the conversation to go away. We have Governor-elect Matt Meyer starting his first 100 days. We even have former governor and now Mayor John Carney in the city of Wilmington, who brought up the fact that education is at the top of his agenda. Matt yesterday during a conference mentioned his top 3, and education was at the top of the agenda. Very interested to know what your expectations are as a politician to what you want to see, not just as the first 100 days, but going forward and the problems that you see. I need to know.
You want me or the secretary first?
I want you.
Okay. I have some very specific thoughts about things that need to happen. And first of all, I'm thrilled that the governor-elect has this at the top of his agenda. And the fact that he's a former public school teacher, I think, is also a help. So I think it's, I view it as a positive that he's put it front and center. I think we're all eager to see the details, but I think that's good news. A lot of what Action for Delaware's Children has been focused on is the fact that what happens in the school is only a part of what of that child's day. And that what happens before school and after school and during the summer also has a huge impact on how that child does. So we've been very strong advocates of trying to bolster outside school time programs, get kids into school earlier, keep them after, have them be able to come in during the summer, and not just showing up to a room where people are, sort of loosely supervising them, but actually having really robust programming that's proven effective in other places. So we've got 3 schools now, Kumba Academy, East Side Charter, and Bayard, that actually have very well financed outside school time programs, and we're really eager to see the results of that. And Collin probably remembers during the campaign, we sent out a questionnaire to the candidates for all state offices, and one of the very pointed questions on it was, will you double down on this, and will you expand the number of schools that have these programs? Because if you talk to the teachers at these schools and ask them, what do you need, to a person, they will tell you, these kids are coming to school with all sorts of challenges that that kids in other schools don't necessarily have, and we need help dealing with that. So I think that's certainly part of it. Having schools that people want to teach at and want to stay at, and a school culture that's supportive and attractive to teachers, so that we have the best possible teachers in the schools with the greatest challenges, I think is also important. And I think that there are proven means of getting that done, and I'm hopeful that that's going to be part of the agenda. I got a list. I don't want to take up all the time.
But my question to both of you, and more so to Collin, is I definitely know that we need those after-school programs. Our kids have too much of a deficit to stop. That 8 to 3 just isn't enough. We need to keep this going. And I know that Wilmington schools are in trouble, but the issues that I'm having is that our entire state is in trouble, especially if you are at a public school. You're not meeting the minimum skills necessary. And what shocked me the most after reading these reports over and over and over and being in a few meetings is the vocational side, where these youngsters are going into the workforce immediately after graduation, probably the next week after they get back from the beach. They're going to work, right? And these are our representatives. These are the folks that are going to be fixing your car. These are the folks that are going to be laying block, doing some things technically. And if you're not meeting those proficiencies, I'm worried as an employer. I am worried as an employer. So I know that our schools here in the city need help, but I think the entire state needs help. So is this a delivery issue? And I'm not putting any onus on the teachers, but what are we not doing right in the classroom that's causing this?
The biggest kind of shift over the last 25 years is taking autonomy away from the teachers and moving it more towards administrators and bureaucrats, whether it's at the state level or at the school district level. I want to trust the teachers, right? I think the role of the government should be making sure kids are fed, making sure kids are healthy, making sure we're getting the lead out of the pain, lead out of the water, making sure that they're able to actually learn. Because if we did that, all of a sudden we can have a real conversation on making sure every single Delaware kid can read by the time they're in 2nd grade. Because if you can't read by the time you're in 2nd grade, you're not going to catch up later.
Right.
Basic math, right? I'd like to see the push, and I was excited about Governor Carney's comment the other day about making sure every 3rd grader, right, is proficient. There's an opportunity right now with 4, maybe even 5 bodies of work all coming to a head at the same time. Matt and Tizzy have been leading on the commission for a long time, looking at the consortium, the Reading Consortium, looking at the Wilmington schools. You got the recommendations coming out of the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. You got the recommendations coming out for equitable funding. You got the recommendations that everyone agrees to now around pre-K, and you got the issues around healthy kids. All 5 of those are coming at the same time. We're going to need to save some money, and some of that's going to be consolidation because we're spending a lot of money badly right now. Some of us require more money. If you don't do it in the first year, in that first term, half the legislature's running for re-election a year later. They're not going to want to do it then. Then you're in that 3rd year, which all of a sudden then the governor's running for re-election again.
And the kids aren't getting any better.
And they're not getting any better. You're losing another generation. So it has to happen now. And my worry is that the recommendations for a lot of these things aren't going to get considered this legislative session, and they're going to be harder to do because of politics next year. And this is the malaise of the Democratic Party that allows us to kind of kick things to the next session, the next governor, the next, and it's just it's a crisis point at this point. And as a public school parent, every day we wait, right, is another kid we lose. And that's what we've been doing for years.
Yeah, and I can't forget, and I had this conversation with my father about the kids that we are going to lose, right? So say that we fix it. In 3 to 5 years, we're back up to a moderate level of proficiency. But there's kids that we didn't hit that were 7th graders or whatever, that are now matriculating to high school. And so we're going to have this bucket of kids that we're still going to have to push through. So it worries me. We have it on both sides. But if I was the governor, this is what would keep me up right now at night. I'm not saying it's not keeping him up at night, but there's a lot of eyes on this. And I don't think right now, and I'm glad, Secretary, that you talked about kicking the can down the road, because that's what we've done. And I'm scared to death that we're going to do that again. We're going to do it again. So being the lieutenant governor, and aspirations of the governor, what would be your first steps in dealing with this?
Number one, you're talking just city schools or statewide?
We'll start with the city.
Okay. In the city, I think that we ought to have incentives for teachers who are willing to, high quality teachers willing to come into the city, teach in those schools, make a commitment to stay in those schools, and have the incentives be substantial enough that it actually draws people. I think we've done that in kind of a half-hearted way in the past, and there hasn't really been much results from it. But best teachers, draw them into the schools. I think there should be things going on in those schools aside from just the teachers that are innovative and interesting, such as honors programs at the elementary school level, higher quality special education programs at the elementary school level, other types of programs within schools that are going to be great for the kids that are in the feeder patterns for those schools, but also attractive to teachers, attractive to administrators. And when we were deciding where to move, when we had our kids, we had to move into a bigger house. We were shopping around for what school district we would live in, and even what school district we feed. I mean, everybody does that. My dream would be that when people 5 years from now, 2 years from now are doing that they would say, I want to go live in Wilmington because I want my kids to go to elementary schools in Wilmington, middle schools in Wilmington. That's when I will feel like they
have it figured out.
Success, yeah. And part of that is having things going on in those schools that make them attractive to everybody. So some of those things are really doable in the short term. You can set up programs like that. You can put incentives like that in place in the very short term.
States do fix this.
Yeah.
This is fixable. This isn't a tattoo that we're forced to deal with forever.
These outside school time programs, the schools that have them right now got them up and running in a matter of months. I mean, there are blueprints for what works and what makes those programs successful. So there are things that can be done in the short term. I think some of the problems are longer term, and you can't just snap your fingers and have instant results overnight. But there are things that can be done in the very short term. So some of those things, just in terms of Wilmington schools, and then more broadly, I do think that attracting better teachers. We're in competition with Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey all the time, getting the very best teachers to want to come here, want to stay here, because ultimately, to Colin's point, the quality of the teacher, the paraprofessional, the folks that are on the ground with the kids in the classroom is probably the number one factor in terms of how kids do.
What needs to stop?
We have built a bureaucracy over the last 30 years that is one of the largest in the country. You got 1 million people, counties in Maryland and in the city of Philly, right, with twice that many, with a single school district, right? We are spending so much with so many special layers that have been piled on a number of requirements that just make it harder and harder for teachers to teach. And I think we have incredibly talented teachers. We have more shackles around them in the state than most other states in the country. And so, what I'd like to see is kind of two things simultaneously. I think we've got to look at, kind of where we can save money and put it exactly where Matt's saying, into the classroom, into the kids, into the educators. We have fewer cents on the dollar kind of winding up in the classroom in Delaware than any of the surrounding states around us because we have this massive bureaucracy, and it's hard. But right now, Christina is a failed school district at this point. Between the mess with the superintendents,
and I'm a product of Christina. So
I think there's great schools in there. The kids aren't being served well. But as we're having the conversation with the Reading Commission about getting them out of the city, which they should have never been in the first time. Jay was right about that 20 years ago. Should we have a conversation where we need the Christina School District? Apple could take part of it by Newark, Red Clay could take a piece, a little piece that kind of juts across 40, you could have Colonial take. All of a sudden now there's one less school district, that's another, $30 million worth of overhead that could go into other programs. But that's an idea that's going to piss off some people, right? But you don't identify with your district for the most part, you identify with your high school. You don't play the championship with your district, right? I'm not playing for, PS, right? I'm playing for Red Clay, I'm playing for PS, right? It's not it's one of these vestiges of kind of small home rule over years, but it's bleeding us dry right now when that money can be plowed back into the schools.
I'm still having conversations with politicians off the air, over the phone, that are telling me, well, Kerwin, I can't say that. And I'm saying, well, basically you're telling me you're scared to say that. But how many more kids need to fail before you can say the hard things. And in life, sometimes you have to say the hard things. And I'm very interested to know y'all's opinion on this. And that is, what if a city, a town, said, my students that are in my city must be proficient. And they say this to the Department of Education and say, we need to ensure this. We will not accept this anymore. I don't think anybody has said that before. Have you heard that?
Not in those words, no.
Right, but sometimes we have to be bold and say those things. We don't have a lot of time left, but we're talking about being bold, I want to talk about the Democratic Party on a national level. Gentlemen, we're getting our butts kicked. It's not looking good. And I said this before on another episode. I think that we need to toughen up. I don't think that we're saying the hard things. I think that we're trying to please everyone, and that rarely works. I'm interested to know you all's thoughts that have gone through these political campaigns, that are monitoring it closely. Am I wrong, sir?
About?
That the Democratic Party needs to toughen up, that we're not doing well.
I mean, you're certainly not wrong that it was a horrible election cycle.
Right.
So something needs to change if we want to start winning elections at the national level. What wins federal elections is probably above my pay grade. But I know that what worked in Delaware, there was a time when people didn't trust Democrats in Delaware to run state government either. I'm going to sound really old now, but 1970s, even early 1980s, Democrats had a really hard time winning statewide office in Delaware because there was a perception that they had done a poor job with it, that they didn't run things efficiently. And then Tom Carper got elected governor. State agencies ran well, and that gave people enough faith there's a whole generation of Democratic candidates, including myself, who benefited from the fact that he actually was focused on competently running state government. So I think part of the challenge, for us, is that there is a perception that we don't run things well. It's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier.
We're proving it on a lot of fronts that we're not.
So I think that, I'm sure there's other, much broader, social issues and things like that, but being able to prove that we can competently and efficiently deal with people's problems as they perceive them, I think is a major hurdle.
Do you believe, Secretary O'Mara, that the Democratic Party has lost touch with the common person? And I hate common person, that sounds so bad, but the meat of America. Do we have touch? I don't think we do anymore.
Well, look, I think we have a bubble, right? Like we have folks that fewer and fewer folks are coming from communities, right? I think it's kind of this professional DC, kind of universe that when somebody says, I'm struggling because every single grocery has gone up in cost, they're saying, no, the macro numbers say that we're doing fine, right? Or compare us to how we're doing in some overseas, compared to France or some other place that has higher inflation. Like we're just not meeting people where they are,
right?
And the thing that scares me here in Delaware is that Governor Carper, for re-election, cleared 70%. Right, when Governor Minner won, the races were a little closer, but she was still kind of clearing 60%. Governor Markell almost got to 70% with Lieutenant Governor Denn at the time. We're barely scraping by 50 right now, 55%, right? So that trend line, that's 15% of the electorate, right, that trusts the Democrats when they're more competent running the government than are trusting them right now. And so it's not a nationwide trend, it's happening right here. So I think, and some of that's national swings, and you have years when the presidential ticket takes things down, or midterm elections or whatever, but we got to deliver.
So how do we do that in 2 years? How do we deliver in 2 years? What are the major big things we need to do to win seats back?
Well, education would be a great start, and the state is in great financial shape. There's actually resources that if the new governor and the new legislature want to make some targeted investments in education, they have the resources to do it. But to Colin's point, again, I'll sound like an old man. It wasn't that long ago that Delaware was a 50-50 state. And the first time that I ran for office in 2004, we had Republican congressmen. One of our two senators was Republican.
That's right.
Getting 55% back in 2004 was big. So it being a blue state, through and through is a fairly recent phenomenon that could change if we don't do a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the midterm, because of the national effects, is probably going to be fairly decent for Democrats. Delivering locally, right, is going to be the key. And it starts with schools. I think Matt's exactly right. And there is progress that can be made. Like some of the programs that the Lieutenant Governor just laid out, like can be stood up very quickly. These aren't like generational things. These are things that can happen right now. I think getting ahead on some of the economic issues right now, the workforce training, they got 20,000 folks looking for work still. You got 30,000 jobs available. The mismatch is huge. Getting those folks into jobs is transformative for communities, for their families, also for the budget, for the state. I mean, it's a huge opportunity. I think also there's a lot of places that are struggling on the crime side, right? And so like, again, things that are in the backyard. I mean, I had an old mentor that used to say, folks like to say they care about all these big global issues or whatever. They care about 50 feet. 50 feet around their house.
Keep it simple,
50
absolutely.
feet around their school, 50 feet on their job. If we win on those issues, the Democrats will be back, in a real way, but it's gotta be personal. It's not theoretical, right? It's not aspirational. It's just gotta be tangible.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this week. We appreciate it. I wish we had more time. I feel like we could go another hour talking about this stuff. But for you at home, making sure that your issues stay right here on the agenda, please comment, click like, let us know your thoughts. You're doing a great job out there in cyberspace letting us know. And they're not all warm fuzzies, but we accept them anyway. So thank you very much for joining us this week. Stay safe.